Welcome to episode 1 of Navigating Complexity with your co-hosts Dan Dillard and Matt McDonnell. In this podcast, Dan and Matt explore stories of individuals who have embarked on transformative journeys, navigating through complex challenges to find fulfillment, purpose, and impact. We start with Matt, whose personal journey has been through some really interesting twists and turns, but all of it with forward momentum. Matt's path has been far from conventional. From his start as a sailor to trials and tribulations in various career paths, including nonprofit work and tech investing. Like all of us, Matt grappled with decisions along the way to find true alignment with his values and purpose. Ultimately, it's the realization of ongoing change that Matt has embraced. He is always open to the next part of the journey as it unfolds. Let's dive into episode 1.
Matt, it's been a long time coming.
It has.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. We've been chatting for this for over a year.
Right. Yeah.
Navigating complexity. I'm really intrigued about what this is going to, the message and the kind of the voice that this podcast will bring and the things that we've got planned. Mainly because everybody's life is complex. It's just there's a series of things that we go through and trying to figure out. But before we get into all that, I really want to introduce your life, your story to the audience so they get to know more about you.
Sure.
Let's talk about, you and I first started talking about some of the first experiences before you went down all your vast career paths.
Sure.
One of the things that fascinated me is you started out as sailing. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I spent most of my time in college hanging out outside, and one of the leaders of the outdoor education program was an Outward Bound employee. And so I basically, wanted to live outside on the ocean.
Okay.
And learned how to sea kayak with her. And then after my first summer, I, was able to get hired, and I turned 20 on my staff training trip. So I was, the youngest by far. And it was just a great environment to kind of grow up in as an outdoor educator, right? Mm-hmm. There were a lot of really experienced people. And then when they canceled the sea kayaking program the following year, my options were to go do something else or learn how to sail. And so I had done some sailing before. Mm-hmm. But it was sort of the beginning of me falling down a rabbit hole to, go get a Coast Guard license and be able to run these programs, both for Outward Bound and, ultimately for other organizations. Yeah.
So I put myself in your shoes, and the first thing is I've got questions. The first question I've got, all right, sea kayaking, does that tell me the difference between that and regular kayaking?
Yeah, so think about it as just backpacking from a kayak. So our course area was coastal Maine, and so we would put it into the kayaks. So we'd go from island to island, and you'd paddle, across a bay or island to island or wherever you happen to be navigating, and then you'd spend up to a month, but generally about 2 weeks to 21 days, just camping island to island, paddling around.
That sounds really cool. That's from an adventure standpoint. But then the other side of my brain is okay, fears.
Sure.
What kind of fears did you have to face?
Yeah.
Because I'll take a kayak out, not even a mile offshore, and I'm like, all right, I got to turn back. This is not.
So the scariest moment was just being in pretty big swells with kind of 6 miles or so in front of us and 6 miles or so in back of us, and 12 kids in kayaks, right? And so I think it's that kind of a situation, right, where you don't have sort of total control over the situation. And so it doesn't matter how good your safety briefing was or how much you put into training the students, right? They're in a situation that they just have no control over and they haven't been in before. And so those are you try and stay out of those situations. And so those are the things that make me scared.
So it wasn't necessarily, you had one more area of complexity to it. It's just not you going out trying island to island to see a bunch of kids.
Yeah. If you would go out with other, instructors, it was just a ton of fun, right? Because everybody knew what to do and how to be safe. And really it's a lot about self-care too. I think that was the other thing that I learned there is that if you can, take care of yourself and just sort of be a good participant on an expedition, you get invited on more trips, and it's easy to switch activities because, a lot of it is pretty similar sort of across the board. Like if you can live with a real small group of people with no escape from one another, and potentially strangers, you tend to, be able to do that in other contexts pretty well too.
it seems to me it's more about, having a system in place that really kind of, this is how I deal with a group of people. And you mentioned safety. You mentioned, that's going to be a priority, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And then you could take that from, as you mentioned, one thing to the next skill set.
Yeah, it's sort of Outward Bound was particularly good at this. They just sort of had this framework, right, that you would follow on a course, and the idea was that it would go from basically what you would call a main expedition, or a training expedition, where you'd be learning all the skills, and the instructor really sort of serves in that guide function. Then you have a main expedition, which is sort of a half of the trip, but right in the middle, and that's really where maybe you stop answering questions because you taught them the skill already, or tell them to ask a friend, and so you're turning over more and more control of the boat. And then in the final expedition, you let those students just run the boat, and if they make really bad mistakes, like go in the wrong direction, like you said, safety is the concern, not necessarily their comfort, right? And so it's a real sort of live consequences type of education, right? Where working together well really matters.
Question comes to mind because I grew up in the era of Jaws. So how do you not only address those kind of fears of what you don't see underneath, but also it's not just your own, but it would also be like one of these kids. Did that come up at all? Or
yeah, I mean, so the hardest one was I had a student who was struck by lightning on a course the previous summer, and he came back onto our course and went sea kayaking, and we had 2 pretty big storms blow through. And so I sat in lightning drill next to this kid, right? And he knew that was something he was going to have to confront. And he had this, wild scar on his leg from where the lightning had exited. And so, he knew, he came back because he wanted to work through it, right? And he didn't want that to be something that he would fear for the rest of his life. And so that's a big part of the facilitation role there is, it's sort of helping people, and everybody shows up a little bit different, right? So there's sort of, like you said, there's that framework, but it can accommodate, whatever sort of personal development goals someone might have.
Got it. Remember the first time I went out and I saw this shark go underneath me. I was like, oh, it's time for me to turn around. It's funny how movies have those kind of impacts on you over time.
Yeah, I forget what the name of it is, but there's some movie where people lose their boat while they're snorkeling. Yeah. I still won't watch it.
So you went from that, and then you transitioned to sailing. So tell me about that, what that did for you, what your lessons were, what you learned from that, what you enjoyed from that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of it boils down to, I wanted to try out that as a career path, in part just because I really enjoyed it, right? I sort of made this commitment to myself when I went off to college that I was going to do whatever I was curious about and passionate about, and, the rest would hopefully come together. And so that was the thing that I really wanted to learn. So I did a semester abroad on a tall ship. I did, work for Outward Bound. I ended up in South Carolina on a boat, which is ultimately how I ended up moving there. But I bounced around a lot doing that. And throughout that process, I realized that, there was some level of instability to that sort of life, right? And I was more interested in, sinking my teeth into a community that didn't change every 30 days, right? And so those were the big driving forces, I'd say, more than anything, to sort of get off the boat. And then, I think the other thing that sort of forced it was the financial crisis, right? So we talk a lot about how that impacted mortgages or lending or what have you. But, the sail training industry in particular, I could sort of see the writing on the wall. Those are big, expensive boats, and they're very hard and costly to maintain more than anything. And so, a lot of them struggled in those years after it, and it just didn't seem like the top wasn't high enough for me, and there wasn't enough growth, right, in the industry as a whole.
Got it. So from everybody that, it's just everybody has a different road or path, but for the most part, a lot of individuals just trying to find that journey, what really resonates with them, right? So for you, a lot of it was outdoors, but you also had your what you went to school for was law, right? I mean, so tell me about how that kind of
Yeah. So at about this point in the story, I decide that I want to go to law school. I've been thinking about doing something more professional than what I had been doing, and in sort of the conventional sense. And I started to look around for schools, and it really came down to a handful. And I came to visit Austin with my wife and our big dog, and we just fell in love with it. And so we decided that, this was really the right place, knowing to some extent that people tend to stick where they go to law school. Actually, Austin's sort of a weird exception because it used to not be that big of a legal market. So UT students would generally go elsewhere, and it was sort of the lucky few that did something a little bit different or worked at a boutique firm that got to stay here. So I, jumped into law school knowing that I wanted to, or thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer. And within about 2 weeks, it was just painfully apparent that that was not the career for me. It's just, the world needs good attorneys, and they don't need attorneys who would be the kind of attorney I would be. And so, it was a very valuable education, but I realized pretty quickly that it was also, an expensive thing and a huge time commitment more than anything. And so, and it has a reputation for being difficult, and that part's true to some extent, but, it was really the time that got me concerned. And so I kind of felt like, okay, well, I could either take an experiential approach to this, right? And I can make myself care about, sort of the more mundane aspects of this education, right? Which is inherently pedantic because it needs to be. And, I can use that and learn those skills by applying them to something that I have deeper motivation about. And so I kind of did a design, not that anybody liked this approach, and it wasn't like a discussed plan, but I was in and out of school a few times, and I was able to take courses that would help with a startup that I had joined as an intern. After, sort of amidst that realization that, hey, this isn't the career for me, but it could be really useful, still in other careers. And so why don't I use this 3 and what ultimately ended up being 4.5 year period, to figure out exactly what it was that, I wanted to do.
So you took your studies, and at the same time you were just like, I'm going to continue going down this path, even though it's not my favorite, but I know that I'll have some application to other things in life. So just kind of open mind.
Yeah. I knew that I didn't know the content. And the other part of this story is that while I was waiting to go to law school, I mentioned the financial crisis. We lost a big grant at the nonprofit that I was working at. And so this SHIP and this program that we had really developed was going to be at a lesser capacity and was going to have a different funding model for about the next 4 years. And so I realized I didn't want to stick around for that, and I needed to transition so that the folks that were going to figure that out and do it could do it. And so the College of Charleston had started an accelerated MBA program. And so there was the first year they were admitting the first class. And so when I got that rejection letter from the State Department of Education for funding our program again, I just called them and went down and had an interview and was enrolled within a couple of days at College of Charleston in the first cohort for this 13-ish month MBA program. So I came into law school having just finished a finance concentration and just full of entrepreneurial energy too, right? And so to run headlong into, the demanding curriculum at a good law school with, peers that are all really sharp, right? It was just the sort of thing where, that wasn't what I wanted to compete in.
Yeah. But you finished that out.
I did. I eventually finished it. So I had 2 businesses that spanned law school. So the first was that startup Famigo, and then the second one was Notley, which was a family office direct VC investment role, amongst other alternatives.
So let's walk into that, because I just want the audience kind of be able to see themselves in your shoes. You were in school, and then your first startup. What was that about?
So Famigo was a mobile content startup. So a guy who's, Quebec is his name, started the business. I met Q a couple weeks into law school. He was one of the first people that I met because I did this program called 3-Day Startup, which sadly isn't around any longer. But it was like a 3-day entrepreneurial crash course. And afterwards, they circulated an invitation for this internship with Famigo, and it was really compelling to me me because I had been sort of struggling with this idea for a while of how do you deliver high quality early childhood content at scale, and what does that even mean, and what does that look like? Because when you look at the research, every dollar, there's this guy, James Heckman is his name. He did a bunch of research into high quality early childhood ed programs and realized that, and I think he won a Nobel Prize for this, that every dollar that we invest in quality early childhood care turns into something like $9 of savings to society on that individual in terms of avoided additional costs, right? Whether it's, additional paraprofessional support in school or, all the way down to, recidivistic crime. And so, I felt like if you could scale that problem to a solution, that was really compelling. And so, I jumped into that business and we developed a number of different products, and there was all sorts of content licensing opportunities. And so it was sort of legal heavy. We also dealt with some the rewrite of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in 2013, which directly impacted our business. So I had to, felt like I needed to get involved in some of the advocacy organizations and work to make rules that made sense and actually kept kids safe. And so anyway, that was a really good background to kind of plug that law school education into.
Right. What are some of the biggest, what I'm seeing here happen is your personality, your needs, your character is shifting and developing. What are some of the hits and misses that you learned along the way?
Yeah. There's a lot of them. I think and I personally started to figure out what were the things that I really enjoyed. So I think one way to ask that question is, how do you zig when everybody else zags, right? Or I spend a fair amount of time trying to talk to young law school students now and, sort of tell them what the other options are, right? Yes, about one of the motivations of this podcast, right? That's one of them is that, really want there's a lot of people that have to find their own way in an quote unquote unconventional way these days. And I think, there's a lot that you can use from an analogy, right? And so when I talk to them, I always ask them, where's your law school degree the least valuable? And they all sort of scratch their heads. And the answer is it's in a law firm or a courtroom, right? And so I realized pretty quickly that if I could sort of have this specialized skill set in a context where that didn't exist, be it a partnership or be it a investment partnership or whatever it happened to be, that there'd be really good opportunities, right, to leverage that skill set.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting thing because a lot of times people don't think outside the box. And it sounds like what you were doing is you started to think outside the box really early. And most people are like, I just got to follow this path because this is what society is telling me to do. And then I've got to go take that job. And there's just a ton of people that will stay in a job they don't really like for like 30, 40 years just because they think that's what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And what it sounds like your path was like, I like this. There is some value here. I'm not sure what that value is. And you had that open question mark and you allowed that to be found through the process.
Yeah. I think one of the other lessons that I had that, was a hypothesis when I sort of started off in my career was that you would have this option set, right, at any given time, whether it was 1 or 10 or whatever. And you would, if you always picked the best option that you thought would move you the furthest, fastest towards your goal, whatever it was, that would be a way to kind of maximize the velocity of your career. And I think that's been pretty true. I took the first 10 years of my working life off to screw around on boats, right? And so I caught up pretty quick. And I think that I think that's a big part of it, right? Is that, you really don't get to do that many things in life, right? Or you don't get to, you certainly don't get to know if they're a success, right? And so I think being really picky about, optimizing those decision sets when you got to make a decision about a new job or a new company or a new set of partners, I think that's really important.
That's fascinating because, one of the things that came to mind as you're thinking about that, a lot of society says you go to college right after high school, and some take a year off just to kind of figure that out. But you took like 10, right?
Yeah.
And in that 10, you were still growing. You were figuring out stuff about yourself and some of the things, the passion things that really drove you, but you were learning along the way. So that then whenever you did jump into whatever you were going to do, it was a lot more efficient. Like you got to the point a lot quicker because you had more of a understanding of how to apply things differently. So that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. And I think the other thing that's worth noting is that it's also understanding what those options are and being agnostic about what that requires of your day to day, right? Like if it's really one of those big goals. So if it means you live out of a duffel bag on a sailboat, or if it means, I lived in Charleston for a long time, which was the right place, right time for me for a lot of reasons, but was not going to be my forever home. I just sort of knew that, just wasn't a big enough city, right? And so anyway, I think there's that other question, right? Of like, what are your limiting factors and how much risk are you willing to take, right? Because that option, you define that option set, right? And so I think that's kind of the art of it, right? Is that people are going to make their own best decisions, and figuring it out and spelling it out for yourself is the hard part, right? Because you're always in your own way.
Yeah, it sounds like also that you allowed your ability to take that adventure for those 10 years. And then in that adventure, you're able to manage and take on risk. And, because you're living on a duffel bag, there's not as much stability, but you learn a lot about yourself. One, becoming independent, if you're in there doing it, you're going to make it happen. So there's a lot of confidence building in that. It's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be a psychoanalyst, but no, the whole point of that is that there's this problem society today where society says one thing, it's not always the best thing for them. You took your own different outside path, and it builds your character and your confidence up first, so that you were able to then. The risk didn't seem as much whenever you were able to do the next stage in life. So
well, and for me, I sort of always perceived the biggest risk being not being able to adapt and not being able to learn.
Yeah.
And I think that, so I did go to college, right? And I sort of lumped that in with that learning period because I majored in philosophy. I explored purely out of curiosity, and I loved it. But yeah, I think that's the other piece of the puzzle, right? Is that you get to choose what you focus on, right? And as a result of that, I think you get to learn what you don't like as quickly as what you do.
Yeah. So we talked about that first business and the things that you learned and picked up from there and what you loved about that. And now let's talk about Notley. What did that do for you, and how did that change you?
Yeah, so one of my investors in Famigo had become a friend and somebody that I was kicking business ideas around with for quite some time, him and his wife. And then they had a couple of liquidity events that they knew were coming up. And so the task was basically to set up a family office and figure out all of the things associated with that. And I mean, honestly, we didn't even use the word family office.
Right.
None of us knew. I think that's the other thing, is that, anything interesting that's ever been done before has been done by somebody who has no idea what they're doing, right? So knowing how to do things when you don't know how to do things, I think is it's sort of another thread in there, right? Is you can't be afraid to just jump in. And so we jumped in and we tried a ton of stuff. It was hugely experimental. I ended up through that process really discovering that real estate was an asset class that I felt like I had an edge in, because my background was math and finance and law, and those real estate is translating spreadsheets into legal documents or legal documents into spreadsheets, right? Those are the only two big activities that are going on there in a lot of ways. And so I felt like it was a really interesting opportunity. Austin in the 2010s was, you didn't have to be very smart to notice it, right? And so it made a lot of us look good. And I started, just sort of slowly doing bigger and bigger projects. And then eventually, with a few different partners, the same core, right? But adding, additional LPs and putting together a little bit more capital. And that sort of slowly grew and got bootstrapped into the Geyser Group, which was is a real estate development business here in Austin. But we do primarily ground up multifamily and condos. So on the residential side of the commercial world.
So this whole show is about navigating complexity. And, one of the things that you and I discussed about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, is how real estate in itself is this complex model in that, and if you're not in real estate, you don't think about it this way, but as cities grow, there's certain areas of town that need to grow. There's all these laws that you've got to figure out. And there's certain restrictions that you've got to work around. And, and we've seen some incredible growth in Austin.
Right.
So that makes issues much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about how some of that complexity evolves in real estate?
Yeah. I mean, so I think when you think about that sailing background, the most important thing I learned there was how to do big things with small groups of people, right? Mm-hmm. That didn't feel like there was a certainty of success. Mm-hmm. And so that translated really well into the startup environment, but it translates really well into real estate as well. And you're right, those two markets, like the ocean and the real estate market are both so dynamic, right? So it does translate pretty well. And again, it's that idea of what's your plan of attack, what's your playbook or checklist for navigating a complex environment. And those are all pretty much the same, right? You have some small number of inputs that you can control, but the range of outputs in a complex environment is huge, and the magnitudes are all over the place. Mm-hmm. So I think that just like the core nature of it felt very, very similar, right? Yeah. Like if you're off on the compass by 2 degrees, and you're off on your cap rate by 1%, right? It's the difference between sailing to the total wrong destination or losing all of your money. Mm-hmm. Right. So I like that those environments where Nassim Taleb calls them extremistan, as like the world where you have these kind of wild outcomes. Mm-hmm. Based on relatively few inputs. And so I think that was so when you look at a real estate project, right, it's if you look at a piece of dirt and you say, I'm going to go build an apartment building there, and then you really start to unpack all the different things that impact that project, most of them, many of which you might not even know about as a sponsor. So it's it's a journey of many years, right? It's not like you go do it and you're done in 3 months, right? These are 5 to 7 year projects.
Will you talk about some of those for the audience? Because I know it's second nature to you, but what if you get into real estate, or when you got into real estate, what did you discover some of those complexities were?
Yeah. So I think, so first of all, there's a language that is used in commercial real estate that, as far as I can tell, it's like a language or a 3-letter acronym soup of both convenience and in its most cynical obfuscation, right? It's a lot of these concepts are not that hard, right? So triple net leases, right? Well, what is a net and how does a lease work? Well, you pay the landlord the lease rate, right, on a per square foot basis over the course of a year, right? So there's just these really confusing things where your average person would say, well, that office cost me $1,000, and you say, no, it costs you $1,950 triple net plus common area expenses, right? And you might actually be saying the same exact thing.
Right.
So I think there's just this linguistic complexity to it that you can get over pretty quickly, but you just have to live and work in the industry for long enough. Mm-hmm. And then you have you have many markets interacting, right? So you have, let's say you want to buy a property in Austin. You have the local Austin real estate market. You have the government layered on top of that, who has certain priorities that may or may not meet with your project. Then you have just the code, right, that you're interpreting, and you're hiring people to help you with that, and an architect to design it. Mm-hmm. And then the GC's got to go employ 300 people to go finish your project after they've bid it a couple. So it just sort of goes on and on. You have contacts at the site development permit office, the development services at the city of Austin, and whatever city you're in. And so when you just start to look at that through line of, hey, I just want to build a building, right? Well, that's a good goal, but there's so many things that are going to push you off that course. And then I think the other one is just the financing, right? It's, you're talking about, if you do a, institutional size multifamily project, just call it $100 million to make the math easy, with 65% debt. So you got to come up with $35 million and a balance sheet that somebody's willing to put up to guarantee $65 million worth of debt turns into a building. So, that's the bottleneck, right? Mm-hmm. And there's sort of endless complexity there. But I think the big thing is that there are these, you're just slowly de-risking the project, right? Like a lot of these lean startup principles would perfectly apply. Because if you're going through a real estate development, right, you're just spending as little money as possible to de-risk, to see if you have product market fit, right? Does that type of apartment actually serve a market in that neighborhood that wants that product at that price? So it's very similar to some of the lean startups for the same exact reason, right? They're selling a piece of software into a very untamed market, and they've got to deal with all sorts of complexities.
You also mentioned something that's awesome. I'm glad that you explained it that way, because it does paint that picture for the audience to like, oh, okay, it's not just I'm going to go buy this building, it is, or this piece of land and do this. There's probably 100 other steps that need to go along with it. You also mentioned something to me that I recall one of our conversations where a certain property just comes with certain legal roadblocks. That one of the things that you discovered, that having the law background, you're able to come in and unwind some of the stuff that was just another complexity. Is that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in Austin, one of the things you find a lot is abandoned, or maybe they're abandoned easements for railroad companies or oil pipelines, and this company went out of business in 1906, right, or whatever. So there's those kinds of things that you've just got to be, you sort of have to be what I think of as an issue spotter for, right? I don't actually do the legal work, but I sort of can go through a document and say, okay, I still want you to go through this entitlement attorney and read all of it, but here are the three things that I'm really concerned about, because I also get the business context. And not that the attorney doesn't, but there's a different level of alignment, right, when you're sponsoring the project.
Yeah. Those are just things like the fact that you say that makes so much sense. Like when a business is closing down, they're not going to go and make sure everything's clean. They just close down. And so that leaves a big mess for someone else to come clean up. And so that's, which if you've got experience in the eye for it, you're like, okay, this can be done, and you know the steps, but others may not. So
yeah, and even developers all specialize in certain things, right? So if you showed up with a automated logistics warehouse, I would have no idea what to do. So I think you develop your expertise, and I think that's where a lot of the passion comes in. I think we're at this sort of magical time right now where the commercial real estate market is rocky, and we have an opportunity for people to develop or redevelop, new types of spaces that are sort of more suited for the way people live now. And so it's sort of this generational opportunity, I think, as the markets loosen back up over however many years. And I think it's a really interesting time to sort of say, okay, how could anybody, right, the people that haven't always participated in commercial real estate, get into that space, right? And where are those passions? Like outdoor oriented hospitality is, it's a booming industry right now. So that's really interesting to me, right? But there's so many other needs that real estate solves that other people understand better and more intimately. And so I think you're going to see a nice proliferation of, the smaller developer as well as the continued consolidation. So
instead of, when people think about, real estate development, there's a couple things. There's some negativity to it.
Sure.
There's some positivity to it. Sometimes people think, and here's as simple as the thought can go. My favorite restaurant was right there, and now it's getting bulldozed over to put a big apartment complex.
Yeah. Yep.
Like these guys are just in it for the money.
Yeah.
And so now's the opportunity, because we've got a voice, is to kind of say the other side of that coin. And you explained this to me, one of our coffee meetings, where, there is this, like, all these people coming in, where are you going to put them? So yeah, there is this, I don't necessarily, miss this restaurant. It's going to be great. I had to do this, but now you've got this ability for housing, which is a need.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard problem, right? And this is one of the things about the complexity of real estate, right? So you could say something like, that was my favorite coffee shop and it was part of the neighborhood, and I don't want stupid condos there, or an apartment or whatever. And then also say, I am going to go to the voting booth and I'm going to pull the lever for more affordable housing bonds. you can do that and not feel or experience the cognitive dissonance, right? That you're directly in conflict with your two opinions, or at least one of them is being driven by NIMBYism, right? And so I think until you kind of make those connections, right, or until people are educated about what is, what are the implications of some of these decisions, the market is not efficient in real estate the way that it is other places. And so it's a lot harder, I think, to put some of that together sometimes.
Yeah. The other thought process that you hear a lot is Austin's getting so expensive, and it's any city goes real expensive, and all what was Austin's core, the music and everything else, it's getting pushed out, right? And so another thing for us is not necessarily, it's not by choice that it happens. Nobody's saying you can't. It's just really the population that's moving in. I mean, am I right? Or just what?
Yeah, it's a wickedly hard problem, and it's hard for a couple of reasons, particularly in Austin. So yeah, I mean, whenever you have growth like that, right? If we live in a capitalist society, right, and so the market is going to push real estate prices up, it's going to push rents up, and therefore there's the quote unquote creative class, right, that gets priced out. Part of that is true, right? But part of it is a deep assumption about who the creative class is, right? And when I think about the soul of Austin, I think about it as like, it's a great place to have a bunch of weird hobbies, right? Like you can still go and you can work at Dell, but like you're going to go to your Kung Fu class later, and then you're going to do, I don't want to pick on anything in particular, right? But whatever you're into, you can find it here, you can find it at a high level. And that's what adds the texture to the people, right? Even if you have sort of the most unconventional or conventional boring job, right? Or conventionally boring. And so, I think that that's the thing that we need to foster. And I think that if we lose that, and a big part of that is affordable housing, I mean, maybe the biggest part, transportation is really close to it. The first year I lived here, I rode my bike. So I lived in East Austin, close to downtown, and rode it up to ATI, which is the Austin Technology Incubator up on Breaker Lane. So it's like 11 miles one way, 14 the other, no infrastructure whatsoever. And I pretty quickly had to get a car. But I tried to do it, right? And I was a dependent cyclist, but had a path to get in a car because I'd just gotten a job. So I think you have to solve those two things, and I think that when you look at how real estate can solve that, it's through zoning, right? Because you can increase density, and then you have to not complain. If you got to pick one, right? It's like when people say Austin's too hot, right? Well, okay, but you still have to decide, do you want to live here or do you want to live somewhere else, right? So I think it's a little bit like that. It's like eventually you got to decide, are you willing to give up on the zoning and have sensible development to create the density that you need? And then, developers get blamed for a lot of these problems, right? But that lack of zoning is part of the problem. The supply is constrained by the government, right? And I don't mean that in like a pure libertarian sort of a thing. I mean, that's just how cities work, right? And so there's, we bought a piece of land a few years ago out of it's called the Development Reserve. And so the city and other municipalities have plots, have chunks of land that they own, that they know they're going to release to relieve housing pressure at the appropriate time. But you have to go through a zoning process, right? And so that's sort of I think there's lots of solutions like that, and then they can prioritize the kind of development, but there's no magic wand solution here.
Right. Yeah. Well, what I love about this show and what we're aiming to put together is, one, have these discussions, like, and as we look at the list of people that are coming, it's going to be all kinds of people from some of your passions, some of the things that you've learned along the way, people that you've met, music being a really big part of your life. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about finance. We'll talk about areas that are complex within themselves, talk about what it is to move forward in those areas. But also, I think, some of the goals here, I shouldn't say I think, this is what we've discussed, is really for the audience to kind of find themselves in some of these stories, inspiration, because some of the things that you've been able to do just by thinking outside the box, someone at home could be having that same question, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm excited about sharing some of those things that are positive that people can learn from. And
yeah, I think you could do a lot of learning from bad analogies, right? Like it doesn't have to be perfect to map it into your right. And in no way, shape, or form am I stumping to be, everybody should be a real estate developer. But I think a lot of the stuff that was most useful for me was an analogy from somebody else who had, done something. I always find that like the highest return on my time is finding somebody who's done something before that I want to do.
Right.
Asking them to go get a coffee and just trying to absorb as much as possible, right? And so I think that's my hope, right? Is that it's just somewhat relevant to somebody's life.
Some type of mentorship podcast, right? Because you're just really sharing some of the areas that you've like throughout history. The way we learn from to advance is looking at what others have done and saying, okay, how can I do that? How can I do that better? Right? It's like you can always improve on things from the past. That's why we keep moving forward as a society. You want to chat about your book? Like what made you kind of like write a book?
Yeah. So I used to teach at a business school here called Acton in Austin. And I kept getting asked by students what was my favorite book on real estate development that I had ever read. And I had to confess to them that I had never read a book on real estate development. I love to read, but that was not how I was going to learn that skill set, right? I just needed to dive in and get a little bit deeper than that. But what I realized over time was that when I went and I looked at the books that were available, there were two groups of people, right? There were folks that were saying, hey, I need to have a conceptual hook so that if I want to go be a real estate developer, right, I understand broadly speaking what's required and what the process looks like. So when I, encounter it, I can organize it for myself and move forward. The other one is somebody who just needs to know about that, right? So if you're an investor, you should really know about real estate right now, right? Whether or not you have an allocation or an exposure, you are exposed to that market in some way. Right. And so I think there's groups of folks like that. The other one that I find a lot is through Stellify, our VC firm. A lot of the prop tech companies are, even the ones that are sophisticated and come from the industry, they come from a slice of the industry. Mm-hmm. And so they know that piece, but they don't necessarily know how the whole sausage is made. And they learn it, again, relatively quickly. But, just having a guide, right, for those two audiences was the initial motivation. And, it takes on a life of its own. I'm about 3 years in and close to being done. So, I'm excited to get it out.
So keep your ears open or your eyes open for that coming out. I want to clarify a vocabulary that you used.
Sure.
Prop tech. What does that mean for people?
So, I was talking to somebody about this morning. Prop tech means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So for me, I try and say real estate tech. So that was a good catch. And really what I mean is anything that makes the existing value chain better, faster, or cheaper. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm not when I say real estate tech, I'm talking about not residential, not, the keyless entry to your apartment necessarily, right? Generally speaking, it would be more focused on some of the sort of key industry and value chain players like a property manager, a general contractor, an asset management firm, those kinds of traditional customers who are the ones who are actually buying technology now, have real pain points around increasing operating revenue, avoiding defaults on their loans. So there's sort of this special period in time where prop tech means, help these folks improve the operations of their companies and assets so they don't have to give them back to the bank, or they, can meet investor returns or whatever. They're motivated and will be for the next couple of years.
Really cool. Well, that gives everyone a taste of who Matt McDonnell is. I'm looking forward to our next episode and the things we'll learn from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining Dan and Matt on Navigating Complexity Episode 1. Matt's story serves as a reminder that ethical fulfillment is not only attainable, but essential in navigating the complexities of our modern world. To learn more about Matt McDonnell and his upcoming book, check out the show notes. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes this season, where Matt and Dan invite a range of super interesting guests to further explore the possibilities of real estate development and continue to navigate the intricate paths of human experience. Thank you, Matt McDonnell, for sharing your story and wisdom with us today.